So as Chris and Amanda mentioned, my name is Alain. I have been with Migro for bordering on 8 or 9 years now. And we've just had an amazing opportunity to impact lives of people around the world on this mission that we have, which is to build an emotionally intelligent world. I want to start off here, and really, I'm sure you're all familiar with Simon Sinek. He has an interesting quote. He says, 100% of customers and employees are people. If you don't understand people, you don't understand business. While you're letting that digest, I'd love to just have in the chat. Can you type in where you're dialing in from, and maybe what role you hold? It would just give me helpful context to know, what is your position? What lens are you bringing to this conversation? So we know kind of where to focus on a little bit more. Caroline, thank you so much. Super helpful. Okay, so this is what Sinek says. Amanda, because you've made me the host, I'm getting the people coming into the chat, the room. Maybe you should retake back control if you can, because it might just be a bit tricky to pay attention to that as we're going. Okay, I say it slightly differently. When people work well together, the work takes care of itself. And when people don't work well together, nothing works. I'd love, again, thumbs up if that makes sense, if you resonate with that, if that is an experience that you've seen play out in your environments. I'm getting some thumbs. Yes, absolutely. Wonderful. Now, the question is, why is that? We can focus on the when people work well together, but the conversation we're having today is around workplace incivility. And so really, when people don't work well together, scientifically, what is it called? It's called workplace incivility. And for most of us, we've never quite grappled with that too much. And there's a lot of scientific research and support behind this, and it's quite drastic. You've all heard of it now because it's the title of the webinar, but I often refer to it as the cancer you've never heard of because it sits underneath the organization. So we're going to do a few things today. Number one, we're going to dive into what it is, what the impact of it is. We're then going to explore why it has such an impact. From number one, the neurological level, the psychological level, and then two, what do we do about it? Okay. Can Elaine's camera be pinned? That is a good question. Amanda, can you make that happen? Fantastic. Okay, so let's dive into what it is. So workplace incivility, by definition, in terms of the academic space, has quite considerable research behind it. It refers to low-intensity deviant workplace behavior with an ambiguous intent to harm. So what does that mean? What does that look like? Obviously, when we think of people not working well together, that exists on a spectrum, on a scale. If you have people shouting at each other, swearing at each other, coming to kind of fist fights, that's very obvious and in your face. But workplace incivility is a little bit more subtle, under the surface, and I'm sure we've all been on the receiving end of it, and also we've all been guilty of it. So examples: emailing or texting in meetings, ignoring or excluding other people, taking credit, passing blame, demeaning, belittling, patronizing, just withholding information, showing not much interest in someone else's opinion, or avoiding people. And how many of us can relate to this, have had some of these, or have been part of doing it or receiving it? I know for me, if I'm busy in a meeting and I just have this thought of, I need to check something on my phone, and you and I'm going to pick the next name next to me, Sarah, you and I are having a conversation, you're talking to me, and I pick up this device, and I start paying attention to this. Number one, have you noticed that I've introduced something in between us? Number two, the way I've made you feel, I'm going to speak for you, Sarah. If you want to put in the chat pane, I'd appreciate it. But I know when someone does it to me, it raises questions around, do they do they care about what I'm saying? Am I not worth being paid attention to? Are they not interested in me? What becomes interesting in this instance is this word ambiguous, an ambiguous intent. Because did the person mean to hurt? Did I mean to hurt you, Sarah? You're talking to me and I do this to you. Did I mean to hurt you? If we have enough relationship, exactly, you hope not. Um, but the word hope means you're not sure. And that ambiguity is actually where the damage kind of comes in. So in terms of this is what it is from the research, I want to show you the stats of the workplace impact. And the first time I saw these, I was horrified, and you'll see why I refer to it as cancer. You start off at the top, right? So Sarah, I'm going to pick on you through the session. Apologies, and I hope you're good with that. If I do it to you 94% of the time, you're likely to do it back to me. 88% of the time, the person's going to get even with the company. They're going to lose work time worrying about it. They're going to lose work time avoiding me. 78% of the time, organizational commitment is going to decline. They're going to intentionally decrease work effort. And then this gets scary. 47% of the time at work is actually going to decrease. And then we're actually going to take 1 in 4 times, we're going to take it out on the customer. And if we had to quantify the business impact, the cost to company of all of these stats, it's dramatic when you multiply it out by the number of people in the organization constantly interacting backwards and forwards on each other, which is why it's such a big deal for people to work well together and why it's such a scary instance when people don't work well together. It gets worse, right? So say, for example, you have a large meeting, a board meeting that happens a leadership team meeting that happens once a week, once a month, whatever it might be. And you have what it might be 10, 15, 20 people in that meeting. And these are your most senior people who would have the highest decision-making potential, highest salary impact. And a fight breaks out, or fight is on the extreme case, which happens, but let's say it's even less than that. Someone gets up to present a point, and someone noticeably does something and disengages. They start checking email, and thumbs up, we've all experienced this, right? We've all experienced this. This is what happens between the people who are involved in this interaction. Research shows that they will exhibit 20% less short-term memory, 61% less verbal task processing. They become less articulate. They become half as creative and half as helpful. And now we need to be innovative and collaborative and all the itives and ideals of what we're trying to achieve. But those two people are functioning half as effectively. Let's say that there were 20 people in the meeting. The other 18 people are going to score a fifth worse, 20% worse on word puzzles, so logic. They're going to be a third as innovative, and their ideation is going to suffer, and they're going to become 26% less helpful. And so what just happened between two people in a room full of people affects them massively and affects the rest of the meeting. And now we have to calculate the cost of that, right? So when we break it down, at the best case of the stats, and this again on a spectrum, this is the best case it might be. It's often much worse than this. 12% of people are going to leave their job directly because of workplace incivility. And that makes sense because people leave people. So if I am working for someone as a leader who repetitively makes me feel like I'm not acknowledged, I'm not recognized, I'm not valued, puts me down, but demeans me, patronizes me, I'm likely to leave that. This one scares me. At the lowest end of the spectrum, 13% of management's time goes to dealing with workplace incivility related issues. What does that mean? Little petty things that could be avoided, conflict between people. 13% of a manager's time is literally spent just putting out these niggly fires all over the place. Um, anyone think it's higher than 13%? As I said, the 13% is on the bottom end of the spectrum. Um, we've got some HR managers. Who was a senior manager? I think it was Caroline. Caroline, does that resonate for you? Um, but but think about that in practical terms, because conceptually it's what it is. But then think about your in each of your organizations. Think about your leadership team. Do an exercise. You don't have to do it right now, but take out your phone. I won't receive it as incivility. Take out your phone, open up your calculator, take the number of people in your leadership team, calculate the number of people multiplied by their monthly salary, multiply that by 12, and take 13% of that. And that is literally a cost to company of workplace incivility, of people issues that are easily avoidable, and you can directly do something about that. And on the other end of the spectrum, 20% of productivity is directly impacted by people being stuck in workplace incivility. Yeah, it depends. Caroline, you're saying it depends on how low level you are talking about, but could be lots more. 100% agree. So I want to dive into, why is this such a big deal? Why does this have such a big impact on us as humans? What's going on in our psyche and in our brains that we react this way to these stimulus, and it causes such a problem? And I want to start here by talking about an interesting experiment that was done about 60 years ago, referring to a research around pain and understanding just the human condition. Now, in any environment, you can plot challenges and problems, from challenges with processes and systems, systemic issues, all the way down to the agents, directly the individuals, the people in the system. And this depiction down here refers to Martin Seligman's double-sided dog kennel experiment. Now, I want to apologize, because this was before the days of ethics in psychology. And so for any animal lovers, this is not me, this is not my work or my research. I do not endorse what was done here, but it does share some interesting lessons for us. Martin Seligman, a psychologist doing his research, PhD research, built a double-sided dog kennel, and he put a shock plate on the one side and a partition in the middle that could be opened and closed. He put some dogs in on the one side with a shock plate. He shocked the dogs, and they had a very normal reaction. They jumped across to escape the pain, to get away from the shock. He then closed the partition. He broke the process. He broke the system. He then put the dogs back in, shocked them again. And unfortunately, when they realized they were trapped, they couldn't escape, they again had a very normal, natural response. They lay down, taking the shock, taking the pain as comfortably as they could. It's quite kind of like a lot of us, that when we find ourselves in situations that we feel we can't do anything about, that we're trapped in, we go into this kind of pain minimization state to just go, how do we take the shock as comfortably as we can, make the best of the situation? A lot of us experience this in work situations, in personal life situations. What happens next is quite profound. He opens the partition, he puts in a new process, he fixes the system, right? And so many organizations, when faced with challenges, what do? We're going to restructure, we're going to re-strategize, we're going to implement a new system or process, and that's going to solve our issues. Martin Seligman does this. He opens the partition, he puts the dogs back in and shocks them. And I'm sure you're all guessing, or have guessed, the end of the story. Even though they could escape, they don't. They carry on lying there, taking the pain, taking the shock. And it gave rise to an understanding of the human condition We're not dogs, but we behave the same way, where psychological paradigms like learned helplessness, low self-esteem, an external locus of control where I have no agency, or my bias, all my isms, my sexism, my racism, all the generational dynamics that I might be facing play out into an environment where I see the world not as it is, but I see it through a lens of my past experiences and the shocks that I've taken through my life. And making this very practical and tying it back to when people work well together or when people don't work well together, I'm sure we've all been in the situation where we are in a team setting or we have people who report into us or we interact with and we give feedback to someone, and it's the most positive energy giving experience because someone takes that feedback on board. They're grateful for it. They're hungry for it, and they react and respond well. And that's in the we're working well together camp. Now, what happens on the other side? We've all experienced this. You give feedback to someone, they get defensive, they get triggered, they get angry, they are combative, and all of a sudden, what could have been, because we've seen it happen before, positive, life-giving, energy-building, and motivating, becomes energy draining. It plays on our minds. Remember all of those stats that we saw with the workplace incivility? We lose work time worrying and avoiding. All of that starts playing out. For us, the person giving the feedback, and I suppose for the person receiving the feedback. And if we're looking at why that is playing out, well, it's here. It's in the paradigms of what's going on. And so that's at a kind of psychological level. I want to double click even deeper to go neurologically. Why is this the way it is? And it actually there's quite a lot going on the slide here, and I'll talk us through everything that we're seeing here. But literally at a neurological, chemical level, we actually become addicted to emotion, and that being positive emotion or negative emotion. So how does that work, right? Something that's quite prevalent at the moment in the workplace, and if in the context of workplace incivility, if, say, for example, Sarah, I have this interaction with her and I pull up my phone and break this conversation, depending on how sensitive that moment is, there may either be a response of shame or a response of anger, right? Shame in the instance of, what? I'm not worth your attention. Or anger, how could you not listen to me? Why are you not listening to me, right? So let's play out these two negative emotions. We know physiologically, a lot of what happens in our body runs on hormones, right? So there's a piece of the brain called the pituitary gland. It's kind of the bartender of the brain, right? It mixes the chemicals and sends the hormones out into our bodies. And there is a specific chemical mix for shame and anger. And let's say we have an interaction that sends that out, right? I'm obviously, Caroline, to your point, I'm using some low-level interactions in the workplace. But let's say we have an abusive boss, or they're swearing at us, or the spectrum is broad. I'm not going to go too deep onto what is possible. But let's say we have an experience where we start getting that shame and anger, and that filters down. When there's too much supply, as in there's too much shame and anger for ourselves, there's another part of the brain called the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus tries to keep things in balance, right? It likes equilibrium. So if there's too much supply of the chemicals, what happens on our cells is these chemicals come and dock in onto the DNA cells, right? There's something called receptor sites in each of our neurons, and these chemicals dock in. Now, when there's too much supplies and there are too many chemicals for the receptor sites, we go through this process called upregulation, and the hypothalamus says, make more, right? So the cells make more. And now when there are more, all of a sudden, the chemicals can dock in, and we're happy. The problem comes when that process happens on repeat, and now there are too many docking bays, parking bays, the hypothalamus does it again and says, now that we've got too high demand and we don't have enough supply, all of a sudden, we now need to send more shame and anger to keep our bodies in balance. And I'm going to jump back to an analogy that we all are familiar with. I don't know how many of us in the session smoke or have smoked, but very few smokers that I've spoken to smoke 20 cigarettes on day one, like a full pack of cigarettes on day one. Chances are what happened was they were at a party in their teens or something like that, and there was a social moment where they had a cigarette, and then they did it again, and then they did it again, and they had one, and it was horrible, and then they had one again, and it was a bit less horrible, and so the journey goes until you meet some people who smoke 20 cigarettes a day. No judgment, but like it doesn't start at 20, right? It starts small and grows. And if we apply the same logic, where now that we ourselves are craving these chemicals and we need to get more, how do we get the chemical fix that we're looking for? Well, it's our thoughts. And so we start filtering the world around us through this lens so that we get our chemical fix of the chemicals and the emotions that we've become addicted to. And so if you have people who have been in an environment that is toxic, not helpful, and where there's workplace incivility playing out, what you might start finding is we get addicted to the drama, right? We start gossiping and bickering and backbiting and the conversation, the meeting after the meeting, right? There are all these dynamics where there are politics and how do we fix it? Well, it becomes very difficult because people at the individual level get stuck here, right? And we've looked at what happens on the negative side. What happens on the positive side? Well, in 2004, a researcher by the name of Barbara Fredrickson was doing some research on something called the thought action repertoire. Now, I've showed you how we can get addicted to negative emotion. The good news is the same can apply in the positive. And we saw the stats on what happens in the negative. What happens in the positive? Well, I'm going to very quickly skim over how this experiment worked. But a number of subjects were brought in for an experiment, and they were shown various video clips to induce emotion, okay, various different emotions. And you could see the emotions ranging from joy all the way down to anger. And they were posed with a relational problem. And the experiment was simple. They were going to be shown all of these clips to induce emotion, and they simply needed to fill out options they could employ to address this relational problem. What was profound was the people who had anger induced, and remember, people, I'm going to keep tying it back, when people don't work well together, nothing works. Well, why is that? Fear and anger, when people were living in a state of fear and anger, they could come up with less than half the number of options to solve the problem as those who were experiencing joy and contentment. So literally, joy and contentment performed double as effectively as fear and anger. And so if we're wanting to think through how do we solve our productivity issues, how do we become more profitable, more effective in the workplace, when people work well together, there is joy and contentment. When people don't work well together, there's fear and anger. Makes sense why this thread keeps kind of reinforcing on itself. So I want to kind of come to this moment. We've been looking theoretically, psychologically, neurologically. Where are we now? I also want to caveat, a number of the research stats I've been citing on workplace incivility came pre-COVID, came pre-Great Resignation, the Great Reset, all of these big trends that have kind of happened over the last few years. I would hazard to guess that those stats of the number of people leaving their jobs, the leaders' time, the productivity impact, those stats have gone sky high post-COVID, in a post-COVID world, right? According to Gallup, towards the end of last year, this is what the global landscape looks like. 77% of the workplace is disengaged. 34%, the kind of workplace well-being levels are sitting at 34%, and staff turnover is sitting upwards of 52%. And just a shout out to Guernsey Mind and the work that you guys are doing. I think this is why your work and the work we're trying to do is so critical right now, because this is what we're facing, right? This is a summary of the problem. And so we need different approaches to new problems. We need to take a different approach to fixing these problems, because what has come before, I don't think is going to cut it. And so what is it that will unlock people? How do we break people out of their learned helplessness? How do we break people out of these cycles of emotional addiction and these paradigms that they get stuck in? The research is actually quite conclusive. It's been shown that emotional intelligence is one of the most effective and direct ways to do this. And what is emotional intelligence? Well, it's a set of skills that practically makes you great at managing yourself and interacting effectively with the world around you. Now, if we kind of apply that logic into our opening statement, when people work well together, I need to be able to manage myself and interact appropriately with the world around me. And if I can't do that, there's no chance I can work well with anybody because at the first sign of a problem, I'm not going to be able to cope with the stress. I'm not going to see the problem through an accurate lens of reality. If the problem is relational in nature, I am not going to be empathetic. I'm not going to be able to build relationships effectively. I'm not going to be able to control my impulses, not to do relational damage when the going gets tough, right? Now, in my experience, when we talk about emotional intelligence is the key, we sit with two problems that often come up. Number one, there's a problem of definitions. I often see people talking about emotional intelligence like we want to develop decision-making or critical conversations or interpersonal skills and emotional intelligence. And so there's an understanding gap where either emotional intelligence is equated with self-awareness, which is a necessary first step, or emotional intelligence is viewed through too narrow a lens. And this slide is helpful because, one, there are lots of different models of it. For us at Migro, we're a bit model agnostic, but really the point we try to make is that emotional intelligence is broad sweeping and it applies to your whole life. It applies to you as a professional and as a person in every interaction, whether it's at work, whether it's in your marriage, whether it's in your parenting. It's across the board global skills. The second challenge that we run into is, well, if EQ is this incredible set of skills, how do we get it from being nice words on a slide to actually living inside, right? And physical fitness, I find, gives us the best answer to this question, right? I can attend a physical fitness workshop where I'm told about physical fitness. I can read fitness magazines till I'm blue in the face. Number one, I'm not going to get a six-pack. Number two, I'm not going to be more fit than I was pre the workshop, right? And yet in organization, time and time again, we believe the workshop is the answer, right? If we teach people about it, they will become it. And unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. We know it's not about what you know, it's about what you do. We don't change behavior by knowledge, we change behavior by changing behavior, by habit, practice. And the same is true with EQ. It's exercises over time. There is no other way, as much as I wish there was. And it's only by doing it that way that we actually see that inside out neurological rewiring, because that's what's required. Literally, we need to go to the neurological level and start training new pathways away from the shame and anger to the joy and contentment so that we can function twice as effectively, right? And if we do that, we're effectively enabling the ability to work well together. That's the goal here in a professional sense, right? When we try and do it these old ways, this is what we see. We see the workshop, and there's the spike of impact. The presenter comes in, plays a nice song at the end, and we get rave reviews. It was an incredible session. And then Monday, and then the first sign of conflict, and 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, 6 months later, the regression curve is kicked in, and people are right back to where they were before. And then for those of us in the kind of HR space, we're left scratching our heads a bit when the executives go, well, what was the ROI? What was the return on investment or return on the development? And we go, well, no, people loved it, right? People attended the workshop. It was great. I think we need to do better, and we can, because now if we take practical approaches where people do the exercises and we can pair knowledge, but in service of practice, what you start seeing is that impact can grow over time through sustained development. Obviously, this is not hyperbolic growth. It will be consistent, sustained growth over time. And that's really what we try and achieve with Migro. And if you get that right, we start answering this challenge, where business gets enamored with this idea that strategy equals value, and value in the form of productivity or profit or purpose. But what so often gets missed, and we throw around the Drucker quote of, culture eats strategy for breakfast. How many of us have heard that before? Thumbs up. Haven't asked for thumbs for a little bit. Are you guys still with me? I'm going to take a sip of water while everyone looks for their reactions. Okay, I think it's lost its punchiness, actually, and do you know why? Because we forget what that means. And what it means on this people value equation is that strategy needs to flow through people. And the state of your people determines how much value the strategy will deliver. And if your people are in cycles of emotional addiction, negative emotional addiction, and if workplace incivility is at play and is prevalent within your organization, you can do strategy till you're blue in the face. You're not going to get the value that you're hoping to get because, quite frankly, people plot on a distribution of engagement, on well-being, on how well they're working together. And that might be either people become kind of net promoters, positive contributors strategically, or detractors. And practically, what does that translate to? Well, we are where we are today. We know that there is a goal of where we want to be tomorrow or sometime in the future. But if our people are not in alignment, if there are things that keep causing us to lose work time worrying, to lose work time avoiding, to our organizational commitment to decline, to take it out on the customer, there's Stan going in the wrong direction, taking it out on the customer. We're never going to get to where we want to be as quickly and effectively as we could. And the opportunity is that if we can address the issue at the individual, and we can simultaneously do that collectively, where multiple individuals are developing their emotional intelligence simultaneously, what happens is that the individual becomes collective and the collective becomes corporate. And we can transform the corporate culture into one where workplace incivility is not part of our culture. And when workplace incivility occurs, we all know about it. We've got the skills and the empathy and the understanding to live out our values in an effective way. And so actually it's out of place, it's out of tune, it's out of key for how we do things around here at this organization. And if we can do this, well, what starts to happen is we can take that bell curve and we can shift it up into the right. So we get more people into the kind of promoter contributor space, and we get people into alignment, moving us closer to where we want to be. Now, there's some time for questions. Before we go to questions, I do just want to say I ended there on living out your values. And living out your values is a helpful first step to go, well, if we are seeing workplace incivility and we are seeing these different things play out in our organizations, but we have values, they're either up on our wall or they're on a company charter somewhere, it's sometimes helpful to go, well, how do I actually do that? What are the skills, competencies, underlying drivers of those values? And something that we offer as a kind of obligation-free service is a bespoke, customized team values or company values guidebook. And so I'm going to put a link in the chat pane in a moment. And basically, you're welcome to just visit that link, pop your values in, and we'll put together this report for you that unpacks these key drivers and underlying competencies that will help you unlock those values. So that link is there in the chat pane. You're welcome to go take advantage of it. But yeah, Chris, that's pretty much what I wanted to share today. Would love to hand it over to you to maybe facilitate if there are any questions on this.